Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, a federal judge dismisses the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump. Also tonight, the selection is in for the Republican Party's vice presidential candidate. And the latest on security, or lack thereof, involving Saturday's assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
This hour of local news is made possible by contributions from the Friends of PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. A federal judge today dismissed the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump. The judge, Aileen Cannon, ruled that the entire case should be thrown out because the special prosecutor who brought the case against Trump was in violation against the Constitution, in that his appointment was not based on a specific federal statute and he was not named by the president or confirmed by the Senate. Cannon is a Trump appointee who has made a number of unusual rulings in Trump's favor that have been reversed, and this decision, which goes against a 1974 Watergate-era Supreme Court ruling, will almost certainly be appealed. Trump was charged with endangering national security in the mishandling of top-secret documents after leaving the White House. There's new information on Saturday's assassination attempt against Trump in western Pennsylvania. A transmitter was reportedly found while searching the shooter's body, and a receiver was found in the shooter's car. That receiver reportedly had wires going into a metal box in the trunk that possibly contained explosives. Investigators are working on a theory that the shooter intended to detonate the explosives in the car as a distraction to draw security personnel away from his firing position and toward the explosion. The theory is that the shooter was detected by attendees and police, which may have caused him to speed up his plan and skip the effort to distract. International reaction to the assassination attempt against Trump included comments from the presidents of France and Ukraine.
It's a shock, I believe, for everyone. When the violence that we feel invites itself into politics in such a tragic way with this assassination attempt, this attack, I feel like some media outlets wouldn't say the word. It's obviously a terrorist attack, which, by the way, resulted in some grave injuries and one dead within Donald Trump supporters. So it's an alert for all of us, because France isn't immune from this violence.
I think that if Mr. Donald Trump becomes president, we will work. I'm not afraid of this. Ukraine, we are in a war. We are emotional. And when there is uncertainty, and indeed the Republican Party is different, but I want to tell you that the majority of the Republican Party supports Ukraine and the people of Ukraine.
One more note on the shooting. The Butler County, Pennsylvania District Attorney said today that he does not plan to file any criminal charges in the assassination attempt because the gunman died at the scene and did not appear to have any accomplices. All this as the Republican National Convention began today in Milwaukee, with Donald Trump officially named as the GOP presidential candidate and Trump choosing Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate. Vance was once a strong Trump critic, calling the former president, quote, noxious and reprehensible, and saying that Trump, quote, might be America's Hitler. But Vance then ran for U.S. Senate and won Trump's endorsement by embracing Trump's politics and especially his false claims about stolen elections. As we mentioned, a federal judge today dismissed a classified documents case against former President Donald Trump. In her ruling, Judge Aileen Cannon stated that the appointment and funding of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional and illegal. Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, a partner at Denton's law firm. Paul, good to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. This seemed like it was very unusual and it came out of the blue. What do you think?
It is unusual. It did come out of the blue. And let me take a step back, if I can, Ted, and just start with some of the basics. If you or I were to have classified documents in our possession, store them in, let's say, our bathroom, and then have the government repeatedly ask us to return those classified documents, we would undoubtedly right now be guests of the federal government at some federal prison somewhere. But what changes the dynamic here, according to this judge, is that the special prosecutor who was appointed to pursue this case as it relates to former President Trump didn't have the appropriate constitutional approval by the Senate, advice and consent, and didn't have the appropriate appropriations for funds. And for that reason, she said, I'm going to throw this case out. And she did so, as you pointed out in your introduction, in the face of considerable case law that says the special counsel is constitutionally fit is a legal and appropriate way to pursue just these kinds of prosecutions.
And that goes back to 1974, the Watergate era, when we first learned about special counsels and special prosecutors. And I think we had it like in 1987, 2019. This thing has come up before. Where is she getting all this?
It was almost an invitation, Ted, in a U.S. Supreme Court decision recently, when you'll remember this, the Supreme Court decision in which the Supreme Court said former President Trump and all presidents going forward are going to have a great deal of immunity from criminal prosecution. And in that decision discussing immunity, there was a concurring opinion from Justice Clarence Thomas, who sort of out of the blue, and I think it's fair to describe it that way, said, listen, should any other district judge be reading this in the future, there is a mechanism by which I think you should determine whether or not special counsels are appropriately and constitutionally appointed. And so Aileen Cannon, the judge who dismissed this case, turned to that concurring opinion, for which only Justice Thomas agreed or wrote this concurring opinion, latched onto that, and points to that as the significant factor here and why it is she thinks this case should be dismissed.
In reading about this and her decision, it's almost as if she said that in this 1974, this landmark, this precedent, until I guess Thomas made an offhand remark, but the idea that in 74 there was the whole idea that the special counsel could be appointed by the Attorney General and not have any Senate confirmation and all that was just a passing phrase itself. What's this all about?
So she said that the law has changed. She said that the interpretation of the Constitution has evolved. And for all of those reasons, she was going to hold that this special counsel was unconstitutionally appointed. Now, what the special counsel's office has said today, Ted, is that they are going to appeal, and they will most certainly appeal. As you pointed out, she has already, Judge Cannon, already been reversed twice in what it is fair to describe as scathing opinions from the Fifth Circuit, who said you got it wrong, and got it wrong for a court of appeals in a very loud and I would almost say aggressive way. They pointed out that she was incorrect. That may happen again, but there's going to be an appeal, certainly whoever wins or loses that appeal, to the U.S. Supreme Court where, as I said, Clarence Thomas sits and will have an opinion to weigh in on this, all of which is going to take time. And the victory here is not just the dismissal of this case. The victory for former President Trump is the delay, because should he become president in the next election, this case will undoubtedly be dismissed, even if it survives all of the appeals.
So, and the bottom line is, she didn't really rule on the merits of the case. She just ruled on whether or not the special, couldn't she have done this a long time ago?
It is peculiar, and she has been subject to a great deal of criticism for that very reason. She is listening to issues that would never really be taken seriously by any other district court judge in my years of experience. She's taking hearings in which she is inviting other parties who are not parties to this prosecution to weigh in. She did so here on this issue as it relates to whether or not the special counsel had authority to prosecute this case. And all of this delay has made some people think that she should be, at least from the Republican Party, including Matt Gaetz just today, saying she should be our next U.S. Supreme Court justice because they believe she has done so well in this case. There are a great deal of people, including legal scholars, who believe that's not accurate.
And so the idea that this could be a blessing in disguise, in that it could, prosecutors could refile, you could get a different judge out there and things could be different, that's all moot if Trump wins the election. I mean, the first thing he's going to do is say, get this out of here.
That's right. And even if President Biden wins re-election and former President Trump loses, the idea that you can get rid of this judge is a very tough hurdle. Knocking a judge off of a case because they are wrong, right, as opposed to misconduct or some sort of ethical misstep, is a very difficult thing to do. Judges are wrong. It just so happens this judge has been wrong multiple times and may be found to have been wrong this time as well.
With that in mind, and last question here, I think it's the last question, I'm not quite sure. This happens 2 days after an assassination attempt. It happens the start of the Republican convention. She has basically, it seemed, from a distance, it looks like she's carrying water for Donald Trump, and that's, you hate to say that about a federal judge, but it kind of looks that way. This is not a good look, is it?
It's not, and here's what I believe to be true. First, I assume good faith, that she is doing her best, and it may just be that she's not adroit enough, has not learned enough, has she not experienced enough to do what is right and what legal scholars believe is right in the face of these legal decisions that are highly criticized, including by her bosses, if you will, in the Fifth Circuit. But if there is something untoward, if there is something inappropriate in all of this, it'll all come to light eventually. That is my belief. These things usually do. So let's wait and see what this results in, undoubtedly by the U.S. Supreme Court or by an election, which will keep this prosecution from moving forward at all.
And real quickly, if the next thing that happens might not even happen until November, do you think? What?
No, we're not going to. She's the idea that they've said that the special counsel said he's going to appeal. The idea that this will be resolved before November is
no way.
I think yes, slim to none.
Paul Charlton, always great to have you on. Great analysis. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
Next time on Benjamin Franklin.
We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Revolution.
Choosing sides means choosing fates.
Diplomacy.
Franklin had to convince one monarch to help the Americans overthrow another monarch.
And a final cause.
It's the first debate in American history on slavery.
Don't miss the conclusion of Benjamin Franklin.
Friday night at 8 on Arizona PBS.
Next time on Father Brown.
I'm very interested in this exhibition.
A priceless work of art attracts an old foe.
Flambeau. He wants to steal the painting.
Father Brown hatches a plan.
If you set foot in that museum, I'll have you arrested for obstruction.
We have descended to Flambeau's level already.
But will it be enough to stop his nemesis?
A welcome addition to my private collection.
You're nothing but a common thief.
Find out on Father Brown.
Saturday night at 7 on Arizona PBS.
Donald Trump today announced that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance is his choice for vice president. The selection of Vance as a running mate was a surprise to some, considering Vance was once a strong and vocal critic of the former president. For analysis on Trump's selection, we welcome Chuck Coughlin, president and CEO at High Ground. Chuck, always a pleasure. Good to have you here. Thoughts on J.D. Vance? Were you surprised at all?
Well, I thought, jokingly, with all this unity conversation, I'm like, well, here's a great opportunity to pick Nikki Haley. That would have been sort of revolutionary. But he went in this direction. I think this was where he was set because, Vance really puts a credible voice on a lot of those Trumpian policies of the underserved in America. The people are left behind by the economic revolution that has encapsulated America. And that is where his birthplace was. His success is a remarkable story. And he's 39, he's a young man, and can provide a lot of vigor, and he's a veteran.
And he literally wrote the book on those who felt left behind.
He did.
And helped get Donald Trump elected in the first. 39, ex-Marine, but he was a former Trump critic. And Jack, he wasn't just a critic. I mean, you're comparing him to Hitler, noxious, a cultural, what did he call him, a cultural heroine? I mean, but it all changed when he ran for U.S. Senate. That's got to be tough to square.
It was, and he has, and the way he's looked at it is he said, look, I've gotten to know the guy. I feel I can place myself within his tribe and be a voice of economic reason for the rest of the country. And I think that's his calculus. Yale graduate, super smart. I think, when Trump talks about tariffs, I think everybody starts to shake. I mean, Vance is going to talk about tariffs in a way that may be able to be seen as somewhat productive with some parts of the American economy. I'm curious to hear that, but he definitely puts an intellectual underpinning under what has been, a lot of baiting by the Trump campaign.
He also brings Ohio, which I think probably would have been Trump anyway, but Western Pennsylvania. He brings the Rust Belt, does he not?
Yeah, those key states that Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. He's a Midwesterner by upbringing. He's got that Midwestern thing going for him. So yeah, that's a good pick.
But is it enough to say? Democrats are already saying he's lockstep with MAGA since day one, which I don't think is accurate because he was against MAGA from day one. How do Democrats go against someone like this?
I think there's a lot of room there. I think we're going to hear all of those quotes. And that will give Vance an opportunity to articulate why he is where he is. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to listen to, because I don't think a lot of us, there's a lot of journalists that have done long-form journalism with him and tried to discern that. I've read a lot of those pieces, and a lot of it is, he's 39. He's still figuring this out.
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of pieces there to be figured out, and now you're the bug under the microscope now. It's playtime, and so we're going to have to figure out if he can articulate those positions.
And he's 39 as the running mate and the vice president, the possible vice president to a possible president who will be advancing in age and advancing in years. There's that. There's also the 2028 presidential election. I got to believe Nikki Haley and who have Marco Rubio and these folks, it's not a great day for them.
No, it's not, because he's this generationally skipped, right?
Yes.
We've gone down the road here a bit. And it'll be also interesting to see how he digests the end of Pence. I think he's got to look at Pence as somebody of great character. He may be out of tune with Pence on some of these economic policies, but he can't be completely in tune. You know, this whole election denialism thing, I haven't really heard him talk a lot about that. And so it'll be interesting to see how he navigates that narrative that Trump has established as being angry. And we see a lot of anger within the American electorate today about, being left behind and being cheated by the elites.
I was going to say, I did see something along the lines where he said that he would accept the results if it was proven that they were accurate, fair and accurate and that sort of thing, and that alternate electors should be allowed for each state in case. I mean, he's tiptoeing down that road. But is that enough for the true believers in the Republican Party? Is he angry enough?
I think that's going to be a thing. And we're going to see this week, right? Now we have Trump starting a convention in Milwaukee, and he's going to talk about unity. And he's going to talk about bringing the country together. I mean, we all chuckle at that, but there's a wide latitude of opportunity there for him to do that. What does he do about the dehumanizing narrative on all the immigration population, their enemies, what does he do with all that? Or does he assume more of a mantle here and allow Vance and him to carry on a more thoughtful agenda? I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
And I think it's interesting as well that someone who was so against Donald Trump and yet saw the light, changed his ways. Trump loves that kind of stuff.
He does. He loves people that express loyalty to him at the end of the day. I jokingly, the Nikki Haley thing was, we could pick Nikki Haley on a unity convention now because now she's got an invitation to be there. Didn't do that because she was criticizing him very recently. JD stuff you got about a 2-year healing period apparently on all of the criticism that you can level.
What do you make of down ballot races with these two at the top of the Republican ticket?
I think the whole presidential election is in a world of its own orbit. It is a whirlwind of things right now. I think it leaves a lot of space for down ballot candidates to narrate their own campaign. I do believe that Trump has probably experienced a surge in support over the last several days as a result of the terrible incidents in Pennsylvania. But I'm also curious to see if those are coattails. My instinct is there's not coattails there. My instinct is that the American electorate is going to be discerning about, okay, I'll go with this, but I'm going to balance it with this. And I'm curious to see how that turns out.
All right. I won't even ask you what the Democrats should do regarding the top of their ticket, because those questions would take a whole lot more
Next
time.
week.
We'll see you then. Chuck, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Arizona PBS has a growing digital footprint. If you're looking to stay connected to your favorite public media station, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe.
Saturday's assassination attempt on Donald Trump was obviously a security failure. As such, questions and concerns are being raised regarding the U.S. Secret Service and its ability to protect the country's current and former leaders. We're joined now by Christina Belaud of CMB Consulting. She's a former special agent in charge of the United States Secret Service in Phoenix. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it.
What exactly is the Secret Service charged with at events like this?
Right. So the Secret Service has complete control over all sorts of events, particularly during the campaign. They are the primary investigative and protective agency for the protectee, whoever it is, the candidate. Their goal is to go in, and oftentimes there's not a lot of time ahead of these events to prepare, and their goal is to go in and do what they can with what assets they have in the townships and cities that they're going into. So there's a lot that goes into setting up a security plan, and we could break this down in so many different ways, but that's their primary role with candidates, and which Donald Trump is a candidate.
Let's break it down this way, because this helps me, because I read about this and I think it's relatively easy to understand. It sounds like the Secret Service sets up an inner, a middle, and an outer perimeter, and they're responsible for the inner. I'm guessing they work with law enforcement, local law enforcement in the middle, and not so much concerned about the outer. Does that make sense to you?
Not so much. I think we can break it down that we have 360-degree coverage above and below is what we're looking at. We do look at the concentric rings of protection, but we have a hand on every level of the perimeter. So we'll coordinate, we'll set up counterparts with local law enforcement and work from the outside in. My biggest concern, and the biggest concern in the Secret Service when I was there and still is what's going on the perimeter. There's no doubt that there was a failure here on Saturday, but there's a lot that goes into pulling together an outdoor campaign event in the throes, in the final months, if you will, of a campaign. A lot of times these locations are decided, in the air as presidents are flying around from city to city.
Right.
They're directed by polls. Sometimes agents get, a couple hours of advanced notice that these events are being set up. Sometimes they get a couple of days.
The gunman got off some shots before Secret Service fired back. And again, close. I saw, again, a report, I'm just judging from what I'm reading, that the Secret Service sniper may have been surprised that the gunman was that close.
So, right, we look at all aspects. First, I want to say that the response of the agents was absolutely textbook. It couldn't have gone, I don't think, any better with what you had. Every agent wakes up thinking, today's the day. It's going to happen today. So we prepare, we train, we are ready for such an event. It was very coordinated. The communication was excellent. I have to remind people who've been asking me, what happened? Why was the counter sniper team up there looking sort of surprised? Well, it was pretty simple. The counter sniper teams have one job. They're to isolate the target and decide whether they're friendly or foe and neutralize them. They don't shoot to wound. So there's a big decision that needs to be made up there, and a lot of communication that has to happen before they pull that trigger and neutralize that target. I believe, after looking at all the video and really reading and really studying all that's available right now, that there was a lack of communication, I believe, which can happen. There are sometimes 2, 3, 4 different agencies, police agencies, that come together to support an event like this, depending on what assets are available with the township or the city. And not everybody's on the same radio communication. There is a command post. There are decision makers with radios, and everyone's in the same room making the decisions. But things don't happen at breakneck speed. We have to be absolutely sure that that person on that roof was not somebody perhaps from another township, another law enforcement officer who had been sent up there to investigate what people were saying on the ground.
And another thing that I found curious was you mentioned that the Secret Service did everything right as far as once the shots were fired. I've got to question that, because it seemed like he was up and he's waving and he's doing his he's still a target and no one knows if there's a second shoot. That didn't look right to me.
And it doesn't, from an untrained eye, and forgive me, but there's a lot of communication going on in the earpieces. There's a lot of information that's being passed down immediately. So the agents very likely wouldn't have gotten up if they didn't feel that the target had been neutralized, if they didn't feel safe or hadn't been directed to do so. So when I say that it happened, I think, as well as it could have, you're also dealing with a 6'3" man who just got hit, is probably going through some shock of his own, is considering, his response, and also trying to remain poised and at a campaign event like we
Right.
know Trump does. So you're also dealing with the cooperation, so to speak, of your protectee in order to get them out. But there was communication, it was coordinated. You certainly can't have the first part of the group of agents pulling while the second part isn't pushing. There has to be a coordinated effort there. And based on what I saw, there certainly was.
All right, all right. Christina Billoud, again, Secret Service, former U.S. Secret Service here in Phoenix, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for the insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ted.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.